Sometimes it's alien to me. This guy, Billy Joel. I don't know who that is or what that is.
Sing us a song, you're the piano man.
I'm reminded of it when I go walk on the street.
You've got us feeling all right.
Oh, right, I'm that guy.
That was a clip from the trailer of And So It Goes, which is a two-part documentary series on the life of Billy Joel recently released by HBO. Based in part on things revealed in this new series, I decided to reopen my investigation of the bar that served as the inspiration for the song Piano Man, which I explored on the very first episode of this podcast. The chief question I posed was whether or not my dad had been to this famous bar, and even whether he could be one of the characters mentioned in Billy Joel's hit song. If you're new to this program, the first part of this special episode features my original exploration, and following that, you'll hear selections from a variety of additional interviews I recorded since that time, along with a brand new segment related to the release of this new documentary. Now, I don't want to spoil too much up front about the new information I uncovered, except to say that I did end up reaching out to some of the producers of this new series, which initiated a fascinating back and forth conversation. So whether you're new to the program or you've been with me from the beginning, I hope you enjoy this special episode as I seek to find the truth about my dad and the bar that inspired Piano Man.
Faith is believing in something you can't see, you can't feel, something that can't be proven.
Then how do you know which is the right faith?
I think that's a gut thing.
I don't think about a right faith. I think about what resonates with me. I feel authentic. It brings me peace.
I think there is no absolute truth in any religion. I think it's a matter of subjective experience.
I kind of just trust my intuition, trust my gut.
You just know. You just gotta follow it.
You just gotta follow what you think is your faith.
If faith is blind, then what makes one belief better or worse than any other? And if it's just a leap in the dark, why should any of us feel obligated to believe anything at all? My name is Shane Rosenthal. I was raised in a Jewish home but became an atheist at a very young age. Later, as I began to question things, I ended up losing faith in my atheism and converted to Christianity. Since that time, I've never stopped asking questions, and I've spoken with authors and scholars from all over the world in order to explore the beliefs and ideas that shape our lives. Over the years, one thing I've concluded is this: we're all believers. But because there are so many conflicting ideas and worldviews out there, we just can't all be right. So how do we find the truth? On this podcast, we'll start by asking questions.
I'm really just trying to figure out what I believe right now.
A few years ago, my dad happened to mention in passing that he saw Billy Joel perform at a piano bar in Los Angeles back in the days before the singer had become famous. At the time, I didn't think much of his comment until later it dawned on me that Billy Joel wrote his famous song Piano Man about his experience performing at a Los Angeles piano bar. According to Business Insider, Billy Joel is currently one of the top 10 best-selling music artists of all time, coming in at number 7, right behind Michael Jackson. And his song Piano Man was his first hit single, which rose to number 25 on the Billboard Hot 100 after its initial release in 1973. In 2016, Piano Man was included in the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry for a song that is, in their words, culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Now, as I continued to reflect on my dad's story, I began to wonder whether he may have played a role, however small, in this culturally and historically significant artifact of American popular culture. Did he, for example, ever ask Billy Joel to play a song while he sat at the bar? Did he perhaps know John the bartender, who according to the song was quick with a joke or to light up a smoke? Did he ever discuss politics with one of the waitresses? Was my dad one of the businessmen who slowly got stoned after downing too many gin and tonics? Well, a few weeks went by and I happened to share Dad's story with my brother who was staying with us for a few days. And as soon as I related some of the details, he decided to check Wikipedia to see if he could find information about the background to the song Piano Man. That's when we discovered that there were some serious problems with Dad's story. According to Wikipedia, Piano Man was based on Billy Joel's real-life experience as a lounge musician in Los Angeles during a 6-month period that spanned from 1972 to 1973. When my brother pointed this out to me, I immediately recognized the difficulty. You see, before I had done any fact-checking, I simply assumed that my dad visited this piano bar sometime during his bachelor days when he lived in West Los Angeles, which would have been in the late 60s. But if Billy Joel performed at this piano bar in late 72, early 73, my dad couldn't have been there, since by that time our family had moved to the other side of the country, to the small town of Bluefield, West Virginia. As I began to look into this further, I discovered another problem with Dad's account. When I asked, he couldn't recall the name of the piano bar, but he was confident that it was located on the corner of Western Avenue and Wilshire Boulevard. And yet, according to numerous online sources, Billy Joel used to play at a place called the Executive Room, which apparently was a little over 3 blocks further west, near the corner of Wilshire and Gramercy. So in light of all this conflicting information, I began to have doubts that my dad had actually been to this piano bar, which had served as the inspiration for the song Piano Man. I simply assumed that he had been mistaken. Perhaps he had seen another artist that reminded him of Billy Joel, or perhaps my dad's memory just isn't what it used to be. Then something interesting happened. As I was discussing these things with my mom, she paused for a moment and revealed to me that there was actually a time, while our family lived in West Virginia, that Dad went back to Los Angeles for a few months in order to look for work. Now, because I was simply too young to remember details of this kind, I decided to record our conversation.
I don't remember how long he was gone, but I know that it was long.
Okay, so he was out in California looking for a job.
Right.
How long was he back before we moved?
It was right away.
Right away. So he came back and then we moved.
Right.
Maybe within a month?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
oh,
so
yeah,
then-
because he got the job, so we had to get back out there.
So that means if it was 4 to 6 months, it would have all been 73.
You're right, Shane. That makes sense. He would have been out there in early 73 because we moved. As soon as he got the job, we had to get everything done, moved, and then get back to L.A. for him to start the job. I do remember spring came and the daffodils bloomed, and he was not there. I had gone out and picked daffodils, and I broke out into a humongous rash and had to go to Dr. Milchin. But Dad wasn't there, so that was spring.
So do you remember, had he been gone a while?
No, I don't.
Okay, you just remember him not being there
I
during
just
spring.
remember he
Okay,
wasn't.
that's a very good memory.
Yeah.
And then he comes back, we move in the summer, so it's spring to
It was
summer.
very early summer, I think.
So you remember the daffodils in the spring and him not being there?
Yeah, and daffodils very early.
Like March?
Bluefield, I would say February, March.
Ooh, that's interesting.
We had tulips in the front, too, that came up.
So late February, early March,
Yeah.
he's not there.
Yeah.
Interesting. So with this new information in hand, I decided to look a little more closely into the details of my dad's story. Now that I knew he really had been in Los Angeles in the spring of 1973, I wanted to find out precisely when it was that Billy Joel played piano at the Executive Room on Wilshire Boulevard. As I researched this question, I soon discovered that there's actually a lot of conflicting information online. For example, though Wikipedia states that Billy Joel played at this piano bar sometime between 1972 and 1973, according to Encyclopedia.com, this took place in 1971. In fact, this new date appeared to be confirmed by information I discovered at BillyJoel.com. Now, given that this information came from Billy Joel's own website, I assumed that its timeline of events would be the most chronologically accurate. But if true, this would invalidate my dad's story, since he was nowhere near Los Angeles from 1969 until early 1973. Because of all the conflicting information I'd received, I decided to research this question further by listening to interviews with Billy Joel himself, including this conversation with Alec Baldwin.
I got a record deal, and then I got traded to a record company on the West Coast called Family Records. And I recorded an album in L.A. I lived in L.A. for a little while. They said, okay, now you made the album. Now you got an album. You need to promote it. You need to go on the road. Well, the album was mastered at the wrong speed. I sound like the Chipmunks.
Well,
it was speeded up.
Kind of, yeah. Now, you did Cold Spring Harbor there.
I did make
And did you do the next album out there?
Actually, I dropped that aside. I had to get out of this horrible deal that I'd signed. And I hid in L.A., and I worked in a piano bar. And this was down in the Wilshire district. Some people think I did it for years. I worked in this piano bar for 6 months. I needed to make some money.
Right.
I made union scale. I get tips. Mostly play the, major seventh chords. Good evening. How you doing?
Billy Joel covers similar ground in this conversation with Charlie Rose.
I signed a bad deal. My first recording contract was a really bad deal. I signed away my copyrights, my publishing, my royalties. I was just so happy to get a record deal. I didn't know what I was signing. I didn't really have a lawyer representing me. So I realized this after about a year into this deal. I got to get out of this. That's when I moved to the West Coast, and I got an attorney, I got an accountant. I said, I've got to get out of this deal. And to make a living, I worked in a piano bar in the Wilshire district in LA. Yeah. And that's where Piano Man came from. I wrote it in 1973 when I was living in Los Angeles, working in a piano bar, the executive room.
But you were there for only 6 months.
I did it for about 6 months, yes.
So in this exchange, Billy Joel explains that about a year into his bad record deal, he moved to LA to get some legal help, which would have been sometime in the summer or fall of 1972. He also specifically states that he wrote Piano Man in 1973. Therefore, the information presented both on Encyclopedia.com as well as Billy Joel's personal website appears to be factually incorrect. The most reliable information, it turns out, comes from Billy Joel himself. Now, in light of the fact that I'd been led down the wrong path a few times thus far and had mistakenly relied upon false or misleading information, I decided to be a little more skeptical moving forward. With the information my mom provided, I was able to place my dad in the Wilshire district of Los Angeles in the spring of '73. But what if Billy Joel's 6-month gig at the executive room actually started sometime in the fall of '72 and ended early in '73, just before my dad arrived in LA? In order to get really precise about the timeline, I started skimming through a couple of Billy Joel biographies. That's when I hit the jackpot. In his book, Billy Joel, The Life of an Angry Young Man, Hank Bordowitz says definitively that Joel made his debut at the executive room in December 1972. This would put him there until sometime in May of 1973. And since my mom has a specific memory of Dad being away while the daffodils bloomed in late February, early March of that same year, I was now convinced that my dad's account was completely plausible after all. He had actually been in Los Angeles during the specific window of time in which Billy Joel was playing at the executive room piano bar. But then there was still the issue of the bar's location to sort out. So I called up my dad on the phone and started asking questions. Dad, do you by any chance remember the name of the piano bar that you went to when you saw Billy Joel perform?
I don't know. That was so long ago, but I distinctly remember it because it was in a bank building and it was at the corner of Wilshire Boulevard and Western. It was a bar in the lobby of a high-rise office building. I have a distinct memory of that.
According to sources I've been able to find online, the name of the bar was the Executive Room. Does that ring any bells?
That's entirely possible. This was, 1973, and your mother helped me remember that by what you said.
Some of the descriptions and images of the Executive Room that I've been able to find online end up placing it closer to the corner of Wilshire and Gramercy. Does that location sound familiar at all to you?
That's not my recollection. My best, and what I feel to be a fairly strong recollection, is Wilshire and Western. And there was a bank in that building. The lounge, the bar, or whatever it was called, occupied the corner.
So you don't remember it being closer to Gramercy?
I remember the name Gramercy, but I'm pretty sure that the corner that I'm talking about was Western, because Western was a big street that led up to Wilshire. I'm confident of that geography.
The interesting thing about my dad's story is that he kept insisting that the piano bar he visited was in the lobby of a large office building located at the intersection of Western and Wilshire. And as he states, the bar itself was situated in the corner of that building. And yet, all the pictures I was able to find of the executive room on Wilshire Boulevard revealed that it was a freestanding building over 3 blocks further west, and that it was located between a deli and a Chinese restaurant. In short, it wasn't part of a large office building, it wasn't on a corner, and it appeared to be at a completely different intersection. So even though my dad happened to be in Los Angeles during the time that Billy Joel played piano at the Executive Room Cocktail Lounge, the more I listened carefully to the details of his story, the more it appeared that the facts he was relating just didn't match with the things I was able to dig up online. So then I decided to look for alternative references to Billy Joel's piano bar experience using the specific coordinates my dad kept insisting upon. And when I did an internet search for references to Billy Joel plus Piano Man that somehow related to the corner of Western and Wilshire, I discovered a 2014 LA Times article in which Joel himself mentioned that specific intersection during a live performance at the Hollywood Bowl. So I spent some time scouring YouTube for video clips related to that particular concert, and after quite some time, I finally stumbled on to this.
This is a song about a gig I had on Western and Wilshire, 1973.
In this short clip, Billy Joel seemed to confirm what my dad had been saying all along. He wrote the song Piano Man in 1973 at a bar that was located on Western and Wilshire, not Wilshire and Gramercy. Notice that he didn't say that the bar was located near Western and Wilshire, as if he was somehow only giving general coordinates. He specifically said that the bar was located on Western and Wilshire.
This is a song about a gig I had on Western and Wilshire.
So in light of this new revelation, I went back and checked the online sources which had placed the Executive Room Piano Bar further down Wilshire Boulevard near Gramercy. And as it turns out, the pictures I was able to find of this piano bar had actually been taken in 1978. In other words, that's where the cocktail lounge was located some 5 years later, and not necessarily where it was located in early 73. I also discovered something else. During an interview conducted by the Library of Congress in 2017, Billy Joel was asked a few questions about the backstory to his popular song Piano Man. And in one of his answers, he says that the Executive Room Piano Bar is no longer there. "I think it's a bank or an insurance building now," he said. This is a perfect match for the office building my dad kept referring to, which for many years included a bank in its lobby and to this day still features in bold letters the name of an insurance company at its top, Pierce National Life. On the other hand, Billy Joel's comments don't fit at all with the secondary location near Gramercy, since that building, as it turns out, was later destroyed and converted into a parking lot for a strip mall. So after all the investigation I'd done into this matter, I was now convinced that my dad's story was entirely credible. While it was still possible that he had confused a different performer with Billy Joel, I was simply no longer able to falsify the major components of his account. He had been at just the right place and at just the right time. So I decided to share all this research with my dad while asking him a whole bunch of questions. And in preparation for that conversation, I searched around for a few more interviews in which Billy Joel explains the background to his song Piano Man with all its fascinating characters. This 1994 recording of an event that took place at Harvard University is my personal favorite.
One of my favorite songs is Piano Man, and I was wondering what exactly the story is behind all of the lyrics, even though it's somewhat self-explanatory.
Okay. All of the characters in that song actually were real people. John at the bar was this guy named John, and he was at the bar. There was Davy was in the Navy, and probably still is, you know. Paul is a real estate novelist. Paul was this guy who was a real estate broker, but he was writing the great American novel. And Paul was always saying, I'm writing a book. I'm writing a book. I'm writing the great American novel. So that's a real estate novelist. Explains that. Let's see, what else? It's 9 o'clock on a Saturday. Okay. Regular crowd shuffles in. Old man sitting next to me, making love to his tonic and gin. Okay, a little bit of poetic license there.
Because I was now much more confident that my dad really had seen Billy Joel perform at this now famous piano bar, I wanted to know what else he might be able to tell me about his experience there. Did he happen to meet any of the people mentioned in the song, like John the bartender or Paul the real estate novelist? Had he met Davy, who was still in the Navy, or did he ever discuss politics with one of the waitresses? To find out, I brought some recording equipment to my dad's place, set it all up, and began asking questions. Your best recollection was that it was a tall building that you went to, like a...
Yeah, it was a bank building.
What would the name of the bank be?
Don't remember. I have a pretty strong recollection of that building being at the corner of Western and Wilshire. And I just don't remember the name of the bank.
So I did some research today about the bank, because you kept saying bank. It looks like that building, which is called the Pierce National Life Building, the base of it was a Bank of America. So you are correct. That memory is correct. There was a bank there.
Yeah.
It's not there now, but it was there, and it was a Bank of America.
Interesting. The main entrance to the building was on Wilshire. It's like, if I'm standing on Wilshire, looking at the building, looking at the front door, back on the left side would be the bank.
Okay.
The right side, opposite the elevators, would have been the bar.
So when you told me last time you had like an appointment with somebody in that same building, like higher up?
Yeah.
And so you came back down the elevator and then you stopped in the bar and Billy Joel was playing.
Yeah, I got off the elevator and basically walked directly almost into the bar.
So Billy Joel was at the Hollywood Bowl in 2014 and he mentioned the specific street names. He said, I had a gig on Western and Wilshire. And
that's pretty defining.
But nobody says that. If you look online, they all have it like on Wilshire and Gramercy. I think what happened was the executive room moved after 73, maybe in 75 or 76.
That's possible because these things turn over.
Yeah.
I mean,
they found a better lease. The other interesting thing is Billy Joel says, I don't think it's there anymore. It's just an insurance building or a bank or something. So he's connecting it to the right street and saying that the building's still there, but the lounge isn't.
How are you getting this information?
The internet is amazing.
Wow.
But the thing is that not all of it's accurate, you know? So you have to wade through it. I found that your memory from 50 years ago is more accurate than a lot of that schlock on the internet.
I'm stunned. Man, is the internet in trouble. The internet is in more trouble than what it realizes. My heavens.
Like, I didn't find anybody talking about Western and Wilshire when I was looking at the location of Billy Joel's 6-month stint at the executive room. Nobody talked about Western and Wilshire until I heard it from you. I Googled that. I find an LA Times article where Joel himself mentions it on Western and Wilshire.
So that really validates me.
Well, let's not go too far.
Well, I'll go there. That bar or whatever it was called was definitely on the corner of Wilshire and Western.
Would you describe the place as like a lower class, hole in the wall, a medium class, decent place, or a high class kind of place?
Oh, a medium high.
Yeah.
The bar, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, the bar, it was nice. This wasn't a neighborhood bar, clearly. I mean, it was in Wilshire Center. This was high-rise office buildings, and that was it. Their clientele was already on site almost, you know.
So it was business clientele?
Business clientele, absolutely. So people didn't come in there with blue jeans on.
Right.
They were already dressed. At that point in time, there was no such thing as business casual.
Right.
You were either dressed for business or you were not.
Right. And he talks about businessmen in that song, so that seems to match with what you're saying.
Yeah, it was definitely not a drop-in neighborhood bar.
Would you say it was very populated or like not a whole lot of people in there?
Not a whole lot.
Really?
There were people in there, but not a lot. Yeah. It wasn't packed, no, or it wasn't really crowded either.
Where are you seated in the restaurant compared to where he's at?
I think my back was more to the street and more to Western.
Okay.
I sort of remember his piano was sort of sitting slanted near the bar.
And was there a sign that you read his name, or was it just something you heard him say?
This is something to think about. I came up with the name Billy Joel from some source. There was something happened there, either a sign or he, I think most likely, announced himself as part of a monologue that goes in between tunes.
Yeah.
As I recall, this was not like a special program. It just, if you happen to be come in for a drink, you happen to see Billy Joel.
Yeah. But you don't have any recollection of being there thinking, oh, I've heard this guy on the radio.
No.
The odd thing is that he says he was going by another name at the time.
Yeah, he did.
I had a gig in a piano bar for a while when I was laying out of the music business. And I was working in a club in Los Angeles. I come out of New York or Long Island. But I figured I'll go to LA and I'll work in a piano bar. I made pretty good money, and I was calling myself Bill Martin at the keyboard. Bill Martin. And it was good bread, and I had a whole other identity. I was real straight, or I could be English if I wanted to be, hello, how are you?
Bill Martin. But you don't remember that name, right?
No, not at all. And I don't know how to respond to that. Maybe I'm delusional. But short of being totally delusional, it doesn't make sense that I would say, oh, and Billy Joel was there. I didn't get excited about it because he's not one of my favorites.
Plus, he wasn't even famous at the time, so it wouldn't have registered to you that he was somebody to even think about getting an autograph or anything like that.
If he wasn't famous, or at least somewhat known, why would I even remember his name?
Well, the only reason you would have been in hindsight. When Billy Joel becomes famous over the decades, something clicked that you had seen him live.
Yeah. That I feel fairly confident.
And on a scale of surety, 1 being the least sure and a 100 being the most sure, how sure are you that the person you saw was Billy Joel?
I'd say 95. I mean,
yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I really would. And I would say 100, except, I don't know if 100 is believable,
In the beginning of his song, he talks about a man making love to his tonic and gin. Do you ever remember seeing anyone making love to a tonic and gin?
No, and I'm pretty sure that I would have remembered that one. Because that guy, that person that he's referring to, 10 seconds later was on the floor, struggling to get to his feet. I'm really clear on where the bar was located, where his piano was located relative to the bar.
Can you remember what you had to drink?
Huh?
I'm just wondering how specific can your memory be?
If I
pushing it,
if I told you, and you believe me, we'd both be in trouble.
But you did say that you were not.
I did have one drink, only one drink.
Only one drink. Okay.
Yeah.
So then you weren't one of the businessmen who were slowly getting stoned.
Was that somebody throwing stones at me?
Well, that's one of the lines in the song.
Yeah.
Businessmen are slowly getting stoned.
Yeah.
But you did put a tip in his jar. He does reference that. They would come up and put a tip in his jar and say, "Man, what are you doing here?" Did you ever use those words? I'm just trying to see if you're the guy in the song that he's...
Oh, no, no. That's not, I'm not that kind of person. Although it's possible I might have said, hey, enjoy your music. Now,
would you mind pretending as if you said, yes, I'm the guy who said, "Man, what are you doing here"?
Yeah, yes, I am. Light bulb just went on. You want my autograph? I didn't realize how famous I was until just now. Big light bulb.
Did you have anything besides a drink?
Nope.
Okay.
They had no kitchen there. They had no menu. It was simply a cocktail lounge. That was it. And of that, I am absolutely certain of. A straight cocktail lounge with a piano entertainment or whatever.
Did you order from the bar or from a waitress?
That's a good question. That one I hadn't thought about. I don't remember a waitress.
So then you probably went up to the bar and got it and then went to your table.
I think I'm more inclined to say that.
So then if it's the bartender, do you remember if he was quick with a joke or to light up a smoke?
Nope, not at all. I don't even have any active recollection of the bartender whatsoever.
And you don't remember talking to Davy, who was still in the Navy?
Davy in the Navy? That doesn't ring any bells at all.
No, nobody was in there with like a sailor hat?
Oh, no. No. If they were in uniform, I would have remembered that because that just didn't happen. Not in the Wilshire district.
You ever see a Navy sailor walking downtown and just taking a strange girl and kissing her?
No. But that is a famous picture right after the Japanese surrendered.
Yep.
That's a famous picture.
Classic piece of Americana. So is Piano Man, though. That's why we're having fun with all these questions. Can you remember any of the kinds of songs that Billy Joel played?
Absolutely not.
Was it just piano or was it him singing?
He sang some.
Was it kind of a mix of some piano and some singing?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he played and took a drink, and in between his numbers, every once in a while, he would say a few things.
At one point, when we talked about this, you said when you got up, you put a tip in his jar. Do you remember what kind of tip jar this was?
I'm not sure. It either was a large brandy snifter or, probably was a large brandy snifter type container set on top of, in his case, on top of the piano where people could come up and drop something in.
Well, that's how he describes his tip jar. It could have been a beer mug, but you came up with that description.
Where are you getting this?
I've been doing some research. I read a biography where he mentioned that kind of a tip jar.
I didn't even know a person could find that kind of stuff.
So, do you remember him talking with other patrons? Not just playing, but also kind of talking and hanging out? No. Okay.
No memory of that. And he stayed behind the piano. He didn't come out in front of the piano.
Do you remember an old guy sitting at the bar?
No, absolutely not. Right. I couldn't remember one single soul that was in that facility other than Billy Joel.
Do you remember if he took requests?
Yeah, well, I remember that. Yes, he did. That is a pretty clear memory.
How would he say it?
I don't know.
Would people just automatically go up to him and ask him, or would he mention it from while he's playing? If you have any requests,
yeah. If you have any, and people wouldn't necessarily go up; they would just kind of call it out. And remember, there wasn't a big audience. This was not a huge place. I mean,
Can you remember any of the things that people called out, like what music was played?
Absolutely not. No recollection of that whatsoever.
But you did say it was a mix between piano music and vocal.
Yeah, he mixed. But I think mainly, if I had to say, it wasn't 50-50. He sang more than he did play the piano.
And was he singing like easy listening, or was he singing pop or rock and roll?
Can't remember.
Country western?
No, it was no country western.
Rap?
No.
Hadn't been invented yet.
I know that.
I'm just checking to see if you're still breathing.
No, by the way, it's not a bad idea. Not a bad idea at all.
All right, well.
Now tell me, when did Billy Joel write that song? Do you know?
He wrote that song during that period. Sometime he records it in September of 1973. And it's released in November.
So it's right in there.
Yeah, exactly. Was he singing open air or to a microphone?
I want to say open air. I'm not sure that he was singing to a microphone. Well, that's more of a guess.
Yeah.
That's more of a guess.
In the song Piano Man, he says the microphone smelled like a beer. So there is a reference to a microphone.
So there was a microphone. And that's just a faulty recollection on my part.
Well, I think it invalidates your whole story. I mean, you think there was open air singing and not a microphone? You couldn't have been there. You're a fraud.
And happily so. I don't know that anybody has ever called me a fraud. I kind of like it.
A long time ago in a club far, far away.
I first produced this episode back in the fall of 2022, and since that time I've uncovered additional information that sheds light on my investigation. For First, I decided to share some of the evidence I uncovered with the owner of the website who posted all the detailed information about the alternative location for the executive room near Gramercy. But he remained unconvinced. The chief reason he cited was that according to phone books dating back to 1973, the address for the executive room actually matched the Gramercy location. Now, this certainly disproves the theory I put forward on this episode, that at one point after 1973, the executive room lounge ended up changing locations. But does this invalidate my dad's story? I don't think it actually does, since another possibility could be that the executive room had more than one location. What if the bar had opened up a kind of satellite location there in the lobby of the office building that my dad visited on Western and Wilshire? Now, I admit that this may be seen as wishful thinking on my part, but it could also be thought of as a way of harmonizing all the various discrepancies. If, for example, Billy Joel performed at a bar on Wilshire and Gramercy, why did he keep insisting that it was on Wilshire and Western? Well, recently my brother forwarded me an article from the American Songwriter which seemed to shed more light on the situation. The author of this piece referred to an interview that Billy Joel gave in light of the 50th anniversary of Piano Man. And in that conversation, Joel revealed that when he went back to visit the executive room some years later, the bar had been demolished. When I read that line to my wife, she responded by saying, "So it looks like you were wrong after all." To be honest, that's what I thought as well, at least initially. You see, at first, this new information seemed to fit better with the Gramercy location, since that building had been demolished. But some of Billy Joel's other comments cited in this piece seemed to point once again to the Western and Wilshire location. So once again, in light of the conflicting information, I decided to listen to the audio of this recent Billy Joel interview for myself.
So this is a strange question. Like, after you wrote Piano Man, I don't know if you ever went back to the executive room after it came out, but I'm wondering if you ever reconnected or stayed in touch with John at the bar, or the real estate novelist, or Davy who's in the Navy, or the waitress who I understand was your girlfriend at the time. But I'm wondering in terms of if you have any idea what they thought of this song or where they ended up.
Well, I tried to go back to see the place after I moved back to the East Coast. This was on Wilshire Boulevard and Western, Wilshire and Western, which is called the Wilshire District. And I drove to where the bar used to be, but it was gone. I think there's like an insurance building or something there, or maybe even condominiums. But the bar was gone, and the people, used to hang out at the bar, they were gone too. I don't know where any of them ended up.
In this clip, once again, Billy Joel clearly states that the bar he performed at was on Wilshire and Western. And if you noticed, he didn't actually say that the executive room was demolished, just that it was gone. What was still there, he said, was an insurance building, or maybe even condominiums. This doesn't fit at all with the Gramercy location, since once the building was destroyed, it simply became a parking lot for a strip mall. However, Joel's comments fit perfectly with the building my dad visited in 1973 on Western and Wilshire, which has numerous condominiums and still features the name of an insurance company at its top. In his book, Billy Joel, The Life and Times of an Angry Young Man, Hank Bordowitz says that when Billy Joel moved to California in 1972, he ended up renting the home of John and Sandy Gibson. Though I remembered John Gibson as a TV news personality on Fox News and other TV networks, back in 1972 he worked for Atlantic Records and was trying to get Billy Joel to sign with his record label. When I stumbled on a way to contact Gibson at one point in my research, I sent him an email and asked if he'd be willing to join me for a conversation on my podcast about the time he worked with Billy Joel. And to my surprise, he agreed. I tell this story on my podcast, so most of my listeners will be familiar with some of these events, because I talked to my dad about this. He said that at one point he saw Billy Joel perform at a bar that was on Western and Wilshire, and this was before the days when Billy Joel became famous. And when I started looking into the details of those stories, I found all kinds of conflicting information online, which is something you probably are familiar with as you're trying to gather evidence and facts to tell a news story. Sometimes you get conflicting sources of information. The primary site that I found has images of the executive room on what looks like Western and Gramercy. It's like a single-story building between a deli and a Chinese restaurant. But my dad said that he was in a large office building. So I'm wondering whether you can help clear things up for us. You said in your email to me that you had been there a few times. So I'm wondering who's right, my dad or the internet?
Dad, at the time that Billy was in the executive room, it was a bar on the ground floor of an office building.
There you go.
And I only went there after hours. It was something you went to at night. So basically the building was shut down except for the bar. And it was definitely in an office building.
Do you remember anything about the lobby of that place or what the front of the executive room looked like?
I mean, it was a door on the street separate from the door of the lobby. So you didn't have to go through the lobby to get to the bar. And there was an easel out in front with a big cardboard sign. It had a lot of sparkles on it and stars and a picture of Billy. And I brought in at least once and maybe twice people from Atlantic because I knew Billy's contract was for sale. And, would sit at the bar near the piano bar and talk to him between songs. And there was a big jar there and people put tip money in it. Just going in their bar, looking at the people who were sitting at the piano bar, that was like their seats. They were there to see Billy and drink. And they knew him and they threw money in his jar and they talked to him and lit his cigarettes. And, they always say, write what you know. And Billy knew that scene really well.
How would you describe the kind of tip jar that Billy Joel used?
I seem to remember it was a big bell-shaped glass jar.
Yeah. What I read from a biography was that it was a brandy snifter, a large brandy snifter. And that's exactly what my dad said. Well, how would you describe the piano? Was it a grand piano or an upright?
It was not an upright. It was probably a baby grand. And, the lid was down because he had stuff on top of the lid. And it was cocked a little sideways. So he wasn't behind the piano. He was closer to the bar. It was a little bit like he performs now. He's sitting sideways on the stage looking out at people. And that's kind of how it was then.
John Gibson's comment about the placement of the piano reminded me of something my dad had also mentioned.
I sort of remember his piano was sort of sitting slanted near the bar.
According to my dad, the piano was slanted near the bar, and according to Gibson, it was cocked a little sideways close to the bar. John Gibson also corroborated my dad's recollection that the bar was located in the lobby of this large office building on the corner of Wilshire and Western. Though it's certainly possible that my dad had confused some other location for the executive room and some other singer for Billy Joel, John Gibson isn't likely to have been mistaken, since Billy was renting his house in those days, and he visited the bar on more than one occasion as he brought executives from Atlantic to see Billy Joel perform. When I pointed these things out to Bob Egan at Pop Spots, he responded by saying that John Gibson could be confusing the executive room with some other restaurant, and added that, quote, a 50-year-old memory of something would not hold up in court. Since my good friend Craig Parton happens to be a trial lawyer in Santa Barbara, I thought I'd ask him to weigh in on this idea that a memory of something from 50 years ago or more wouldn't stand up in court.
There is no rule in the law that says 50-year-old events cannot be attested to by live witnesses.
But since memory fades, how then is the jury supposed to be able to trust a person's memory from that long ago?
Well, they look at things like, did the witness have the ability to see this event, the opportunity, the read on the situation, to have an event ingrained in their mind so directly. Now, are there levels of reliable testimony? Eyewitness testimony is subject to cross-examination.
That's the key.
That is a critical vehicle to determine what the truth is. But then you'll have documents that you put in, papers, articles of incorporation. I've had cases where I've had people testify about corporate documents they executed 50 plus years ago. But that's another avenue of evidence. But the fact that it's an old event is nothing new in the law. It adjudicates events 150 years old.
What do you think about corroborated testimony when you find two witnesses stating things independently when there's so many overlaps between their report? That seems to be, in my opinion, the strongest kind of evidence. Do you agree?
Very powerful to have independent lines of people that have no connection with each other. They're not part of a conspiracy to tell a story, and their stories connect and don't conflict with one another. It's a very strong way to go in a case. It's a powerful weapon.
According to Bob Egan, the best explanation is that since it was so long ago, both my dad and John Gibson misremembered certain details about their time at the bar. But what's particularly odd about this explanation is the fact that John Gibson and my dad misremembered certain details in precisely the same way. Bob replied saying, "I can't figure out why Gibson and your dad would have similar memories. If neither one of them remembers the bar looking like the photos I posted online, then they seem to remember another bar. As far as I know, Billy didn't mention playing in other bars during that period, so maybe they saw someone else." While it's certainly possible that my dad confused someone else for Billy Joel, the explanation that John Gibson saw someone else simply doesn't hold water, since he came to the executive room on multiple occasions with the intention of getting Billy Joel to sign a deal with Atlantic Records. And the fact that both my dad and John Gibson have so many details about the bar in common is the thing that, in my opinion, simply cries out for explanation. I discussed this point with former LAPD cold case detective J. Warner Wallace.
Well, that's exactly how we would consider it in a trial.
Yeah.
So what is corroborative? Corroborative could be something physical that corroborates a piece of the story. It could be another eyewitness who corroborates something. And for sure, if they're independent and have no contact with each other and they give you some weird detail that seems hard to imagine, to guess incorrectly from two different sources, I think that's pretty strong. Jurors will have to evaluate that. And in order to deny that, you have to explain how, if two people said it was in a major office building, who would just guess that?
And it's the jurors who place the weight of evidence on whatever evidence there is, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So yeah, there's no, when we talk about evidence sets, especially cumulative cases, that's what you're doing here, is you are building a case for the reliability of your dad's testimony. And you're building it on pieces. And the more pieces you have that point to him as reliable, the better the inference. Could you still be wrong? Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
According to Wallace, the oldest cold case he ever worked on was related to a crime that took place back in 1972, and the case ended up being solved some 47 years later in 2019. Liam Cooper is an Australian entertainer who performs Piano Man in his live show. He too is fascinated by the backstory of this iconic song, and last year I invited him onto my podcast to discuss some of the evidence I had collected thus far.
I 100% believe you and agree with you that Billy must have played in the Wilshire and Western location. I don't think you can deny the recount of your dad and of this John Gibson. I listened to the interview they did with him, and I think, I don't think you can disagrry with two people telling the same story and describing the building looking exactly the same. But then I also 100% believe Bob Egan's research about there being an executive room at the location that he said it was, and that the phone book records confirm it was, and the photo from the LA County Archives say it was. So there really has to be, some rational explanation. And, as you suggested, it's not unlikely or impossible that he may have played both bars, or maybe he played one bar and then the bar moved.
Yeah, that was my initial theory, but that didn't turn out to be right. Bob corrected me on that. The phone book records show all the way back to 1970 that Gramercy location had been there. So the question is whether Billy Joel ever played there. Under the theory that it's a secondary satellite location, I think you could put Billy Joel at both locations.
I agree. I think it would be very plausible to say, oh, hey, Billy, can you play at this one tonight? Or can you do this one this week? Or whatever it is. It's plausible.
And that's all the kind of stuff that gets lost when you're summarizing a story from, a long time ago. Yeah, Billy Joel used to work at our bar. You just simply summarize it quickly that way because it's too complicated to talk about. Well, there are 2 different locations, yada, yada, yada.
But also, I don't think there are that many people in the world like us that care about it on such a granular, detail-oriented level,
Yeah. When I was trying to piece it all together, it didn't make sense because I was looking at what my dad was saying, comparing it to what Bob Egan was saying, and I was thinking, maybe he saw another performer that kind of reminded him of Billy Joel. That would be the better explanation until he started saying things that actually matched with things that Billy Joel said. And when finally John Gibson corroborated the whole story, it's like, wow, how could 2 people who didn't ever communicate with each other get it wrong in exactly the same way?
Yeah. But even Billy being quoted as saying, it was on the corner of Western and Wilshire.
And that the bar is gone, but the building remains.
Yeah. And then he also says something about it looking like condos or looking like, apartment or an office building
Insurance
or whatever.
Buildings,
so
yeah.
I think if he had driven past the Gramercy location, he would have been like, oh, it's a car park now or a strip mall or whatever. Like he would have described it differently.
Now, as I mentioned at the opening of this show, HBO released a 2-part documentary series on the life of Billy Joel titled And So It Goes. And as one might expect, the film told the backstory to the song Piano Man. Now, in that part of the film, Billy Joel didn't add anything new to the discussion about the specific location of the executive room. However, the image of the bar shown in the film happened to be the one discovered by Bob Egan and featured on his website. While this could be taken as a sign that Billy Joel performed at the Wilshire and Gramercy location, it's also possible that this was the only picture of the bar that was available to the filmmakers. So I decided to reach out to some of the producers of the film, whose names I found on the Internet Movie Database. After researching the names of some of the lower-level producers, such as those in charge of archive footage, I reached out to them via email or social media and received a few responses. The question I put to these individuals was whether their film ended up showing the correct location of the executive room, since 2 of the witnesses I had personally interviewed on my podcast ended up placing it elsewhere. These producers wrote me back saying that they would forward my email to someone who might be able to answer my question. And after several weeks, I eventually received an email from Jessica Levin. As it happens, Jessica Levin wasn't merely a higher-level producer involved in the documentary, but was in fact the co-director of the entire project. Her note was short and sweet. Dear Shane, how can I help you? In my response to Jessica's gracious invitation, I wrote her back explaining the controversy about the location of the piano bar, along with the information I was able to gain by interviewing 2 individuals who had been there. At this point, I said, it appears that the executive room had 2 locations during that period. We can place Billy Joel at the bar in the office building on Wilshire and Western, but the question is whether he ever played at the one shown in your film. When I sent an image of that location to John Gibson, he didn't even recognize it, though he had seen Billy Joel perform at the executive room multiple times as he attempted to get him to sign with Atlantic Records. In her response, Jessica wrote me back saying, quote, "This is the only photo I'm aware of that shows any executive room sign, which is why we used it in the film. Since we used the photo for illustrative purposes, it would not have been something we fact-checked, since neither Billy nor anyone else mentioned this specific address in the film. However, since it seems to be of pressing importance to you, why don't you draft a note for Elizabeth Weber and or Sandy Gibson, and I'll pass it along." End quote. Elizabeth Weber and Sandy Gibson are 2 individuals who appear in this new documentary. Sandy Gibson happens to be John Gibson's ex-wife, and according to one source I read, she was the one who drove Billy Joel to the executive room when he first interviewed for the job. Elizabeth Weber is Billy Joel's ex-wife, who worked with him at the executive room as a cocktail waitress. In fact, in various interviews, Billy Joel has stated that the line in the song Piano Man about the waitress practicing politics was a specific reference to Elizabeth Weber. So I took Jessica up on her offer and drafted an email that she then forwarded to Sandy and Elizabeth. And within a week or 2, I got a response from Sandy Gibson. Throughout our back and forth conversation, Sandy confirmed many of the details I already knew. She had driven Billy Joel to the executive room for his first interview, and when I showed her images of the 2 location options, she recalled taking him to the single-story building pictured in the film. While this wasn't necessarily the answer I was hoping for, it does make sense of another piece of evidence that one of my listeners discovered a few months earlier. He wrote to me saying, quote, "The John Gibson interview is very convincing for the high-rise location, but I did some digging in the archives of the LA Times. In 1972, the executive room placed classified ads for a piano player, and the address matches the Gramercy location. Now I don't know what to believe." When I looked into this myself, I was able to find the specific ad he referred to. Here's what it says. "Wanted, combination piano player and singer for the executive room at 3953 Wilshire Boulevard. Call for an appointment." This may be the very ad that prompted Billy Joel to apply for the job at the famous piano bar. It's also worth noting that this ad indicates that the bar was originally looking for a girl to fill this position, so it appears that in Billy Joel's case, they decided to make an exception. In a follow-up conversation with Sandy Gibson, I asked how many times she had visited the executive room, and she responded by saying it was just on that one occasion. Thus, under the theory that the single-story building on Wilshire and Gramercy was the bar's main location, it makes sense that this would be the address that would appear in the ad, and also the location that Sandy Gibson would recall. But since John Gibson and my dad both remembered seeing Billy Joel perform at a bar in the lobby of an office building on Wilshire and Western, perhaps this is due to the fact that he was hired to work at the bar's secondary location. Now, according to Bob Egan, this hypothesis isn't backed up by evidence, since only the Wilshire and Gramercy address appears in phone book records. This is one of the reasons for my suggestion that the Wilshire and Western location may have only been temporary. Perhaps the owners decided to move down the street while they did some renovation work, or perhaps they opened up a short-term lease for a second location, which they decided not to pursue long-term. However you slice it, the evidence does suggest that the executive room did have a secondary location, as indicated by the corroborated testimony between my dad and John Gibson. So, while we have yet to discover additional documentary support for this other bar, the testimony of these 2 independent witnesses is compelling evidence in its own right. After Sandy Gibson listened to my interview with her ex-husband, she too became convinced that Billy likely played at this alternative location. So she decided to check with a friend who had also seen Billy play at the executive room. And here's what she found out. Quote, "I spoke to Tony Lawrence, who was Billy's project manager at Columbia Records. His memory is better than an elephant's, and he confirmed what your dad, John Gibson, and even Billy himself stated, that the executive room was on the corner of Western and Wilshire." According to an article that appeared in The American Songwriter, Billy Joel's song My Life was based on Tony Lawrence. Seen in this light, Tony Lawrence appears to be an extremely credible and reliable source, who also ends up corroborating the Wilshire and Western location of the executive room. Since Sandy Gibson also sent me Tony's email address, I sent him a letter introducing myself along with a link to an article I wrote about my dad's recollection. Here's his response. "Shane, I read your amazingly detailed article about Billy Joel and the executive room. My recollections are as follows. First, I saw Billy there at least twice, both times on Saturday nights. Second, I put $20 in his tip jar at least once. Third, I think it was part of a larger building, not freestanding. And fourth, I always thought it was on the corner of Wilshire and Western. I hope this helps. Sincerely, Tony Lawrence." In light of this important new development, I shared Tony's email with Bob Egan, who responded by saying, quote, "If you ever find photographic proof of the corner location's existence, I will gladly add it to my entry. But until then, all we have is half-century-old memories. I'm from the old school. Seeing is believing." I then reminded Bob that the previous year he wrote to me saying, hopefully new clues will come in the future to seal the deal one way or the other. In my thinking, this new evidence from Tony Lawrence certainly qualifies. Though it's not photographic evidence, it isn't any less compelling. Bob responded by saying that, quote, Perhaps for some reason, the executive room did move to the corner of Wilshire and Western for a short time during a renovation, and Billy Joel played there. When you find that photo, I will put it up. I then asked Bob to imagine what would happen if courts refused to allow anything but photographic evidence. In this case, I argued, the majority of criminal cases would end up being thrown out, since most crimes aren't captured on film.
Silence in the court!
Instead, criminals are convicted by a variety of means that end up placing them at the scene of the crime. And this, of course, includes eyewitness testimony. It's also worth pointing out that if only seeing is believing, then we can know nothing at all about history, at least the history of the world before the invention of the camera. Did Julius Caesar exist? Was he assassinated by members of the Senate? Did George Washington cross the Delaware? We can only know these things by means of reliable testimony. Well, around that same time, I received one final email from Jessica Levin, who wrote to tell me that she finally got a response from Elizabeth Weber. It's a long time ago now, she said, yet the only bar I am aware of was the one on Western. Since Elizabeth Weber worked at the executive room with Billy Joel in 1973, this is extremely reliable and weighty evidence. Of the two possible locations for this bar, only one was located on Western Avenue, the one in the lobby of the office building on the corner of Western and Wilshire. This is the bar mentioned by my dad, John Gibson, Tony Lawrence, and now Elizabeth Weber. This also fits with the words of Billy Joel himself, particularly when he said, "I had a gig on Western and Wilshire." The bar is gone, he said, but it's now an insurance building, or maybe even condominiums. This is an excellent match for the Pierce National Life building on the corner of Western and Wilshire. Not only is it an insurance building, but many of its offices were later converted into condominiums. What I find particularly significant is the fact that Elizabeth Weber said this was the only bar she was aware of. Since she lived with Billy Joel at the time and worked with him at the executive room, she was clearly in a position to know whether he played at two separate locations. But the fact that she only recalled the one location on Western Avenue is a strong indication that she and Billy worked exclusively at the bar in the lobby of the Pierce National Life building. According to the director, the only picture of the bar they could find with the sign was the single-story building near Gramercy, and since it was chosen for illustrative purposes, it wasn't something they fact-checked. But of course, in the popular imagination, the use of that image in the film seems to imply that Billy Joel performed at that site. In Billy's mind, however, though that was the bar's main location, in his case, it was likely just the place he went to for the job interview. Now that I had confirmed the results of my original investigation by doing all this additional research, an intriguing idea occurred to me. What would happen if I compared my results to the information I might receive through artificial intelligence? What kind of information would I get, for example, if I asked one of the AI models to inform me of the specific address for the piano bar that Billy Joel played at in 1973? Here's the answer I received.
The specific address of the bar was 3953 Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. The building that housed the bar was demolished in the fall of 1985. The location is now part of a small shopping center and parking lot situated at the corner of Wilshire Boulevard and Gramercy Place.
Now, while it's certainly true that a place called the Executive Room Cocktail Lounge did exist at the address provided, as we've seen throughout this episode, according to the corroborated testimony of many independent witnesses, Billy Joel played at a different location of the Executive Room, one that was situated on the corner of Wilshire and Western. And though the bar is no longer there, the office building still remains. I believe the result of this experiment reveals the limitations of artificial intelligence. You see, AI is not and never will be that authoritative voice of omniscience we crave. No, AI is simply a knowledge aggregator. In other words, it searches the internet for all available facts relevant to the question. But what if some of the relevant facts don't happen to be available on the internet to be aggregated? This is what I discovered throughout the course of my investigation. Though the AI model I queried was able to find the main address of the executive room, likely from Bob Egan's website, it was not able to access the memories of John Gibson, Tony Lawrence, Elizabeth Weber, or my dad. Another problem with artificial intelligence is that some of the facts that are currently online and able to be aggregated turn out to be half-truths, assumptions, and sometimes outright mistakes. As I discovered early in my investigation, even BillyJoel.com had incorrect information when I compared it with statements made by Billy Joel himself. So when I asked AI for the address of the executive room, though I was given the bar's main location, that turned out not to be the specific address where Billy Joel showed up for work. Now, of course, this is not to suggest that artificial intelligence is the source of our problems. No, the real problem is that most of us desire simple and easy answers to our questions, which is why AI is so tempting at the present moment. Of course, we're also tempted to believe, without question, the pronouncements of our favorite health expert, political commentator, or religious guru. The problem is that all the world's experts, commentators, and gurus simply can't be right, since they so frequently disagree with one another on so many important matters. Therefore, what we really need is discernment. In other words, we need an approach that says, in light of all the possible answers to a given question, why should I believe this particular answer? In my thinking, this kind of healthy skepticism isn't dismissive, but investigative, and should be applied not just to other people's views, but also to our own deeply held beliefs and convictions. Well, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this extended and updated version of my investigation of the bar that inspired Piano Man. If you'd like to hear my interviews with John Gibson, J. Warner Wallace, and others in their entirety, I'll leave links to those episodes in the show notes along with a few other related resources. Simply head to humbleskeptic.com, that's humbleskeptic.com, and I'll look forward to being with you again next time as we discuss the beliefs and ideas that shape our lives.